After my last video, the comment section went really wild. Some of you were hyped and saying things like this is the future of design, while others were not so enthused, right? People were saying this is scary, AI is gonna take our jobs. Some were like, this is cool. But some also asked if it can actually work in real life. So I decided to test it and ask myself, what if I build a brand from scratch using nothing but my brain and ChatGPT? No creative team, no agencies, just ideas, references, prompts, and a very chatty AI partner. That guy right there. And the result? A bold and energetic coffee brand called BeanBoost, a mascot I created called Kojo, and packaging that looks shelf ready. You would love it. Ads that look real, and a creative process that was equally excited and chaotic. Just like in real life, working with real people. Well, if you love that show reel you just watched, then you're going to love the process just as much. Well, I hope you do anyway. If that's why you're here, thank you for sticking around. Now I'm going to walk you through my process from beginning all the way to the end. We're going to start with step 1, which is the very first thing you start when you're working on any design project. In fact, any project at all. The first thing is you need a good brief. So we're going to walk through the brief, and the next thing we're going to explore the mood board and the visual style that we identified. Step 3 was designing the logo and all the various logo elements that we're going to need. Step 4 was building a mascot, and this is the little bean guy I call Kojo, because every good and exciting brand needs a face. So that's what we decided to do, to build a mascot. And step 5 was building the core visuals. Now these are the supporting elements that work alongside the logo. Now these are the colors, the typography, the patterns, the imagery, and all sort of stuff like that. We developed all of it in ChatGPT. Now step 6 was bringing it to life and making it feel relatable. This is where we used copywriting, all from ChatGPT as well, to make the brand feel more lively, feel more relatable, and feel more funny. Can also give the same energetic feeling that we're going for. Step 7, polishing up the entire presentation, which is what you saw earlier in the video, and making sure that all the mockups look beautiful. And the final stage is reflection. Here I'm going to talk about what I loved about working with ChatGPT, the challenges I faced, and what I absolutely hated when it came to working on this project. And finally, my insights. Now these are specific things I noticed that could help you guys, specific prompts that could make a big difference in your prompting, and all the really good stuff. So stick around if you want to know how I did it, because this might just be a long video. I hope not, but let's get going. Well, if you haven't noticed already, I love design and I love to create. But there's nothing more frustrating than creating without knowing who you're creating for. So the very first thing I did with ChatGPT was to create a brief. I mean, of course, I could design in a vacuum, but your design skills are way more powerful if you have a who, a what, a why, a where, and a when. Now, these are simple questions that typically sort of guide me in making sure that my designs have direction. So in this specific case, I asked ChatGPT to create a brief, and it came up with this own crazy idea. Now the brief was the very starting point. If this was a real project, this is the type of document I would have received from a client. That would describe the audience, the products, the mood, the tagline, possible colors, and all of that. Here, ChatGPT came up with a brand name called BeanBoost Coffee. It gave me a target audience, which was young hustlers, students, creatives, and entrepreneurs who need to start strong and stay sharp. And the coffee is made from 100% locally sourced beans. And now the objective. Now this part is super important, because for any project, you need to understand what the objective is. If you're able to meet the objective, it doesn't matter what the world says. Your client is going to be happy because you checked all their boxes. Now this is the part that I paid attention to. And the objective said to create a high energy brand identity that feels urban, fresh, and proudly African. At the same time, I had my own ideas when this was passing through my mind and how I was going to represent this. Now, the age of the target audience were between 18 to 35, and their lifestyle, these are students, creative, early professionals. They live in urban Accra, urban Ghana, and the diaspora. They value self-expression, they're hustlers, they pride in local goods, and the visual style was to bring a pop of energy. And finally, the tagline was fuel the hustle. Now, after I got a brief, the next stage was to build a mood board. Typically, I build my mood boards by referencing or looking at sample work on Behance, Pinterest, Dribbble, Twitter, Instagram, wherever. So I picked all the good stuff and I sort of curated it and put it into ChatGPT as a template that I could start working with. And it came back, started giving me its own version of the mood board. I mean, it was great, but it wasn't quite there yet. So I prompted to get a second option. I didn't quite like the second option, but the two of them combined was giving me a really good idea where the direction could go next. Here I was observing things like the color palette, the typography, the entire feel of the mood board I was getting was really giving me many ideas on where this whole design process could go. And I was taking inspiration from many places. I was looking at things like contemporary Ghanaian design, things like really old music album covers and how funky and cluttered and just chaotic it was looking. But at the same time, it had this originality and it felt very energetic and very proud and bold. And I wanted to borrow that same concept and put it on BeanBoost because of exactly the kind of brand that BeanBoost was. I'm already talking about it like it's a real brand. Oh God, I love this. From here, ChatGPT referenced its own mood board to give me things like the color palette, the typography style, graphics and pattern style, photography and illustration style, a packaging vibe, messaging, and everything. So from here, the next step was to actually create the logo. Now for this stage as a brand designer will take you a really long time in real life because this is the part where you almost have to wait for inspiration to strike for you to design a really good logo. But because I'm working with ChatGPT, it had already given me a good idea and a good starting point. Now it's already suggesting that we should work with a word mark based logo, something chunky in sans serif or maybe a chunky serif. It's suggesting that we use a custom lettering, something handwritten or something playful. And it's also saying that we should pair with an icon. Now the icon could be a lightning bolt, a sun plus a cup combo, and a bean spark. And it was even requesting to actually suggest to draw some of these logos for me. But of course, since you're working together, I'm not going to let ChatGPT do all the work. So I reviewed what it was saying and I was happy with some, but I wasn't really so happy with the rest. So I took the idea of a word mark based logo and I was like, let's make a word mark based logo with an icon. And instead of going with the icon that suggested like the lightning bolt and the sun and cup, all these I thought were a little bit too common, right? I wanted to do something that was familiar, but trendy and cool. So I wasn't trying to go the way ChatGPT wanted me to go, but it really gave me a good place to start. But just for the sake of test, I asked it to create a logo for me anyway, and it created this logo. This for me sucked, but it did give me the feeling that we were all describing. That bold rawness, you can see how imperfect the font looks and all of that. I really did like that. So I was like, wait a minute, maybe I can find some reference that will be really close. So I went back to my mood board and I saw this one logo that I really liked from a brand called Brew Bean. And I liked the way the cup was like a character and there was a hand holding the cup and there was the brew bean. And I loved that something about it. So I gave it to ChatGPT to use it as a reference and it came out with this version. Now this first version, I liked the typography, but I did not like the bean. It looked very mean. And I didn't like it. It looked really mean and I didn't think this was gonna work. So I said it was cool, but I wanted to make the bean look much cooler. And this is one of the things I like about working with ChatGPT, right? Because it's natural language. You don't have to learn how to prompt in any specific way like you do in other apps like Midjourney, where the prompting would have to be, it's like after every prompt, if you make a mistake, you have to start all over. But with this, I can actually ask it to do certain things, to take it a step further, to take it a step below, to notch it up a bit, to notch it down a bit. I mean, it's regular conversation. It's like talking to a friend. So I said, oh my God, this is such a brilliant bean. Let's take it up a notch, but make it in black and white only and make the bean cooler, like a cool kid from the future, right? And it gave me this. And immediately I saw this, I knew this was the logo. I knew this was it. And I didn't change anything. Like, the only thing I did change was the colors, but the entire structure, the font, the icon was the exact same thing, and I loved it. Now, the next step was to add colors to the logo. Now, that's one cool thing about ChatGPT. You can actually ask it to send you the files it generates on a transparent background so you can use it. So I downloaded the file and I sent it to Adobe Illustrator. And this is another cool part. Even the coloring process was also done with AI. So Adobe Illustrator has the generative recolor feature. So I just selected the logo after I converted it to a vector, of course, selected the entire logo and just went into the color and just went into the generated color tab and generated myself a couple of variations. Of course, taking in mind that we already had a color palette, but I wanted to see what this AI could do. It gave me a couple of colors and I loved it. So that's what I used. So for the logo, I created two versions. So there's the version that has Kojo with the BeanBoost typography, and there's a rounded version that has Kojo in the center and the bean going around it. Now, for any brand that is as dynamic as the brand we are creating, you can't just have one static logo. You need to have a logo that can adapt to several situations like social media, for print, and also for packaging. So in this case, going forward, they're going to see exactly how we use version 1 of the logo, which is the primary version, and then the stamp version, which is the brand mark or the secondary version of the logo. Now that we're done with the logo, the next thing was to build the mascot. Lucky for me, the logo has an icon, which is the cool bean, right? And I decided to actually make the bean the mascot. But you know, mascots are alive. They do so many things. And this was a way that we could bring character into the brand by making the mascot a relatable, likable figure that was doing all sorts of things. So I asked ChatGPT to create me a version of the mascot that was holding the Ghana flag, and they created this. This was lovely. So from here, we both decided to call the mascot Kojo. So in this case, I can just ask ChatGPT to do something with Kojo, and it automatically knows that we're talking about the mascot. And then I asked it to create me a series of images where Kojo is doing so many fun things, and it created these two panels for me. And then I picked the ones I liked, and then I went ahead to use it. So now we have a mascot. We have our logo, we have our mascots, and we have the typography done. The next thing was to think about the packaging of the coffee. Now this part was pretty much just me. I didn't really do a lot here because I already had an idea for the packaging because of the references we were looking at. And I was thinking of creating 4 flavors for this, and I wanted something that was a process so that all the packaging together could tell a story. And it came to my mind that the entire process of making coffee is a journey. So I prompted to use line art to create illustrations that would depict the 4 stages of coffee making. The first stage being the harvesting, the second stage being the processing, the third stage being the packaging, and the final stage being the sales. Now this is what happens in a coffee shop or in a supermarket when you're buying it off the shelf. And I asked ChatGPT to create an illustration that depicts the first one in a very specific style. And this is what it created. So you can see it's a very beautiful image. Now I was very specific about what I wanted. I went through several iterations on this until they got it perfect. By the final version, I asked to get a border around the edges, to put in some of the cross symbols, to give me like a valley, a foreground, a midground, and a background, and to make it look lively. Now everything else was ChatGPT. The people picking the things, the child in the background, the donkeys at the back, the sunsets, the clouds, the borders with the leaves, everything was ChatGPT. So this was the first version. This was the version of the processing. So you can see somebody sort of mixing it with water, somebody milling it down. The next was also the sales. I think we missed the packaging. Yes, so this is the packaging. You see people sort of putting it together in boxes and stuff like that. Similarly with the same symbols I had all around the edges. And finally, the sales. So this is somebody buying it, a granddad sort of drinking it. And also like you can tell that already I was in love with this. But one problem, it came in brown. And I had no idea why I did this, but I didn't really have a problem because I knew that when I was about to do this, I would go through a coloring process. And that's what I did next, to ask ChatGPT to color them for me. And wow, the coloring part was brilliant. So with this version, so this is the packaging version, ChatGPT decided to give it a color on its own, and I like the monochromatic feel. Now this is straight from the brand palette. I didn't have to touch anything. I just gave it the file it already generated, which was the brown version, and asked it to color it. So it gave me this version for the packaging. It gave me this version for the harvesting. It gave me this version for the sales, and it gave me this version for the processing. And I did love all four of them. So now we're done with the logo. We have the fonts, we have the character design, which is the mascots, and we have the illustration for the packaging, and we also have it in color. So now that I had all the working elements of this brand, I had to go back into the process and actually make it look real. Now this is where the real design starts. When we weave it into a story, we put it onto the packaging and then work our way through it. So from here, I downloaded some mockups from Envato Elements and put it in. Now the question is, why didn't I get the mockups from ChatGPT? Well, I did try, but I wasn't liking the results because whenever I uploaded my files, which were the raw files, the design versions into ChatGPT, the details were off and they were missing. And this is exactly what people were saying with the video I made before, that it misses the fine details. And when you're working with brands, the fine details matter, especially because you go through so many rounds of revision that if things keep changing every single time it creates a prompt, you're going to have a problem. By the time you're done with the 10th change, the design is completely different. So instead of asking ChatGPT to create the mockups for me, I went the old traditional way to download mockups and put them on it. So I made these 4 versions and I ended up coming up with a name for the product because we're treating these like real products. So I decided to come up with a system to name the products, and we chose cities in the country that I live in, which is Ghana. So the first product is called Kumasi Gold, which is a city. The next product is called Takoradi Tides. Now Takoradi is a coastal city, so I just used tides. Now the next one was called Tamale Roots. Now Tamale is like the agricultural center of Ghana. And the last one is called Accra Hustle. Accra is where I live and it's like a metropolis. It's crazy busy and everyone is always on the grind. So I decided to call it Accra Hustle. Now this is the 4 versions that we have. And then I decided to create different mockups of it and use it in different ways. Here you have other versions of the mockup from the front and the side for both the Kumasi Gold flavor and for the Takoradi Tides flavor. And then I did the same thing for the Accra Hustle flavor and also for the Tamale Roots flavor. So for the logo, I created 2 versions. So there's the version that has Kojo with the BeanBoost typography, and there's a rounded version that has Kojo in the center and the bean going around it. Now for any brand that is as dynamic as the brand we are creating, you can't just have one static logo. You need to have a logo that can adapt to several situations like social media, for print, and also for packaging. So in this case, going forward, they're going to see exactly how we use version 1 of the logo, which is the primary version, and then the stamp version, which is the brand mark or the secondary version of the logo. So from this stage, it was time to now build the core visuals. Now these were every other thing that comes together to make you feel like it's a real brand. Of course, we had the packaging design, but now we have to use it for ads, for posters, for merch, for any other thing that makes it feel real. And this is where ChatGPT came in handy, because from here it was just smooth sailing. We had both agreed on the vibe we're going for, the colors, the mascot, the mood. Everything was really much done. So here it was just us just spitballing and just collaborating, and it felt so real, like I was working with a real person, right? Because sometimes it would respond to my prompts with really funny things, and it was hyping me up. Like the whole process felt so natural. And I think that's the power of ChatGPT, like the use of natural language. It's so intentional that you might lose yourself in the process thinking you're actually working with a real person, especially if you have the voice mode. So I started by asking ChatGPT to come up with some really interesting words that we can use to make some fun and funky typography. So it gave me the first one, which says rise and grind, and it created this all on its own from a simple reference that I gave it. And it even added in a little pure plane, which I didn't actually ask it to in my original prompt, but because of the continuous conversation and we had both agreed on the type of vibe to go for, ChatGPT felt like it was necessary to add a little plane. And I think it just goes to speak to how intuitive the software can be, or rather the AI can be. Should I be calling it a person? I probably should give my ChatGPT a name, but this is such an intuitive move because this is a creative decision that it made all on its own. I didn't put it in the prompt, but it added it and I liked it. And then we made a second version which says on the rise, a third version which says kickstart, and then the final version that says savor the moment. And these versions went ahead to be used to make these 3 designs. So initially when I made this design, the coffee beans here were not sort of in the picture, right? It was just the cup that I designed and then the text in the background. But I wanted it to feel more real, right? And what I did was I also went back to ChatGPT, prompted it to give me transparent versions of coffee beans that were flying all over. And it gave me these coffee beans, and you can see the motion blur that ChatGPT added, and I think that was brilliant. So I downloaded it, copied it into Photoshop, placed it on the cap, and it just looked brilliant. So there's another version of it, and this another version of it. And I think I just love all of them. And it's very interesting how it would take you so long to go through several stock sites to find this type of stock image that had coffee beans flying all around and download them. It would take you hours. But with this, I could be intentional and type out exactly what I wanted, and it gave them to me. So from here, I use it to create several versions, like the ones on the green background like this one, and the one on the green background like this one, and this one which is on the beige background, and this one as well. And you can see that I'm playing with the colors. Now this part is all me because of course ChatGPT does not have the creativity to actually use it in the way that you might want. And this is what collaboration is all about. I get the raw materials and I decide how to use it. So this is why I think ChatGPT can't replace designers, because although it could have done this, but it couldn't have executed it in the way that I wanted it to because of how complex the design was. So then I created these parts, and from here we went ahead to create the merch. So for the merch, I wanted something simple but fun. And this is where I remembered we already made mascots. So I brought the mascots back in there to create the front part of the merch. We are first working with a round neck, and you can see you have the mascot Kojo playing the guitar and he's flying his hat out to wherever. And the next we also have Kojo with his leg on the soccer ball. And then you see how again we're still playing around with the same brand colors staying in frame. Now on the back we have the same typography and the same text effect that says brew, boost and repeat, and also have that one logo that we created that you thought we were never going to use. That's it at the back in the top center of the shirt, and you have it there, BeanBoost, and you have Kofi with his hands up like that, and the thing says authentic premium Ghanaian quality coffee. And that now I went ahead to create a second version of the hoodie which had Kojo waving the Ghana flag in the front, and at the back in the graffiti style it says rise and grind. Now this is a merch that everybody I think would love to have. I would love to have this merch myself. I think it's so fun and it's so cool how ChatGPT understood the mood we're going for and started creating these texts that we could use for so many things. The next, we created these coffee cups because come on, who makes coffee and doesn't have a coffee cup, right? So we created these little coffee cups, and then the cup holders was also another place that we could use certain brand assets we created, like the leafy patterns that went on the top of the cup holders and everything else that you see. So at this point, I'm thinking I'm done, it's looking great. Now we had to move on to create ads that could go on social media, on billboards that could be printed so people can know more about BeanBoost Coffee. And then here we went into ChatGPT with a couple of prompts, created these images. Now this particular thing you're seeing here was not entirely created straight from ChatGPT, but there were layers that were created from ChatGPT. The photo came from ChatGPT. The coffee beans on the green background came from ChatGPT. The background with the leaves came from ChatGPT. And then the copywriting, which says fueled from Kumasi Gold, came from ChatGPT. Now this version, the same thing. The guy with the glasses on the left-hand side came from ChatGPT. The beans came from ChatGPT. The hustle never ends. The hustle never rests, sorry, which is the copywriting, came from ChatGPT. The same for this, the hand outside of the car came from ChatGPT. And then the copywriting on the right, the beans as usual, everything. And same for the last image, came from ChatGPT. Now I'm going to show you something very interesting that happened here with the hand out of the cup, right? Because after I created this, I asked ChatGPT to give me a system where we can get infinite concepts with the hands coming out of a car or out of whatever. So we can use it to generate countless design pieces for brands. Now, this is one thing that happens whenever you're working with brands, is the ability to create infinite designs without stressing your mind and to create a templatized version of concept generation. So with ChatGPT here, I asked it to create a framework in which we can generate endless pieces of design like this. And that's how I created this series of images. Ultimately, I didn't use them, but if this was an ongoing project, I could see so many instances where I could use all of these images. And this is the final result of what the framework looked like from ChatGPT. So here you see several versions of Kojo sort of doing certain things, and ChatGPT of course came up with a copy. It says, meet Kojo. He's not just a coffee bean, he's the whole vibe. He's cool under pressure, always ready to boost your grind. And I think I like the way it sort of rhymes, because you see the way he's not just a coffee bean, he's the whole vibe. Cool under pressure, he's always ready to boost your grind. That's that sounds really cool. I really love this. And I think that was pretty much the entire presentation. I wish I could go deeper to talk about the exact step-by-step process, but I don't want to make an hour long and I'll get tired talking. But I think over time, I'm going to be giving you more insights onto exactly what went on in this process. But I'm sure by now you've seen screenshots and screen recordings and all of this. I'm going to try and package everything I did as a downloadable file, so in your free time you can go through the assets and just appreciate the work that went into it. So now a recap. We built a brand identity for the coffee bean, BeanBoost Coffee. We ended up creating a tone of voice and giving the brand a personality by creating a mascot called Kojo, who was doing all sort of interesting, crazy things. We designed packaging for it and then made mockups for that. We ended up creating a visual ad for it, which is the hand, the party guys, and all of that, and created copy and taglines. And a lot of other cool things that I actually really loved. You know, the process was very entertaining. As much as it was annoying because sometimes it would stop, I just really enjoyed it because it felt like I was working with a real person. But it's not like everything went smooth. Like there were times where I wanted to just throw my iPad away and just go crazy because the inconsistencies of the generation always made me want to scratch my eyes out. But I had to work with it. One of the things I hated was the image inaccuracies. Now, sometimes the render will stop halfway, sometimes it will just freeze, and sometimes it would say it's done, but there's nothing showing. This made me lose my mind. Other times I was getting blocked and it said there was restrictions with my prompt. Meanwhile, the prompt was so friendly, there's no way I could see a reason why this prompt would be restricted, and then I would redo it and then it would work. So that was crazy and very confusing. And other times, the image quality was like a hit or miss. It would look great sometimes, and other times the human part would look so unrealistic. And sometimes the car, like there was this one instance where the hand that I wanted was sticking out to the side of the car, like literally the door, and not from inside the car like it actually will. And also the disaster I went through when I was trying to generate the mockup. You know, it's very funny because when I made the other video, everything looked really good. So I was expecting it to work extremely well with this, but I don't know what's happening. I have a feeling that ChatGPT is beginning to sort of roll back on certain capabilities of the software, because I could bet that when I tested it initially when it came out, it gave me much better results with generating mockups than it did when I worked on this specific project. And it's only been about a week and a few days. So I have a hunch that the company is trying to roll back on the capabilities of the AI, maybe as a security feature, I don't know. I also had a whole identity crisis with Kojo. One time ChatGPT is generating Kojo with hair, another time is giving Kojo some funny looks. It wasn't consistent enough, but it did try and work it out. Now this is where I took it to Illustrator to fix it myself, because I wasn't getting certain consistencies in the character design of Kojo. But that was not a big problem because it's something that if you're a designer, you can easily fix in Illustrator. Now, perhaps the biggest bottleneck that I had was the cooldowns. Who knew that there were cooldowns in ChatGPT? Because I would prompt so many times, it would get to a point it would say, you have to wait for 5 minutes. And the more you do, the longer it takes. There was a time where I had to wait for a whole 30 minutes for me to be able to prompt and get images again. And that I think was crazy. also don't forget that it takes you a long time to even finish generating one image. It could take you sometimes like 5 minutes or 10 minutes, depending on how complex the image is. So you add that to the cooldown time, you know what I mean? Crazy. Too long. That's one thing I did not like about this project. And one last thing was prompt fatigue. Now, this is me being very tired from prompting, because like it's one thing to be creative and it's another thing to be precise, right? So you have to be precise with what you want the app to create for you. And for me, sometimes I'll just be sort of hallucinating in my mind and not being so precise with my words, and I end up getting crap in return. So I had to train myself to be very specific with what I wanted in order to get the results I was looking for. Now, all of these were some challenges that I faced. Of course, there's some that I've forgotten, but this sort of encapsulates the major challenges that I faced whilst creating this particular brand. Now, here are the things I loved. The first one was the speed in which I could bring ideas and brainstorm with ChatGPT. Now, this is fast. It was just me and it. We're just going really fast, thinking, sharing ideas, and it was brilliant. The next thing was the freedom that I had to explore. Because ChatGPT knew the brief, it knew the limitations, and it always kept us within scope. Even sometimes where I would think completely outside the box, it would gently bring me back. And it reminds me of working with a creative director that will sort of guide you in the path you're supposed to go, especially if you're thinking too wildly. And it was doing exactly that, and I loved that. Although there was freedom, there were still constraints because we were working with a design brief. I also love that sometimes it did throw surprises. Although we were within a brief, it would create things that looked like they were outside of the brief, but with close inspection, it still fit within the parameters of the brand that we were building. And that surprise ball for me is those little moments that I call AI being creative. An example is the paper plane it added in with a rise and grind thing. And I thought that was really creative for a machine that does not apparently have creativity. That's what people say, but this is proof that AI can be creative. And the last thing I loved was the fact that 24/7 AI, hello, it doesn't sleep, it does not forget, because this actually took me about 14 hours to do from beginning to end. But because I wasn't working on it non-stop, there were some days in between. There were times where there was a period for about 2-3 days where I didn't even touch it, right? But if I look at the entire time I spent on it, it's probably around maybe 12 to 14 hours, right? But then I come back and it always remembers exactly where we left off. Unlike working with real people, if I had gone away from the project for like 2 weeks, the designer would be going out of his mind and would have forgotten most of the details and wouldn't be up to speed. We'll have to spend time bringing ourselves back to speed on where the project was going just before we can even start. But because AI is 24/7, always present with an infinite memory, unlimited designs, I just picked up right where I left off and I didn't have to rethink anything. I'm sure there's certain things I've missed, but at this point, I feel like I've talked too much and this is just a demonstrational piece. Of course, it wasn't perfect. There are things that I'll change about this and there are things that I would perfect if I had time to really take my time. And there are some things that I'll perfect and straighten out, like the edges of the character design of Kojo, and several things that didn't quite rub me the right way. But for a design that took me about 14 hours to make with just me and an AI partner, I think this is pretty darn close for me to think that this is worth the $20, because I used it essentially as a stock image generation platform to help me not only generate photos, but to also generate photos that I could change by talking to it. It became my copywriter, it became my co-creative director, it became my graphic designer, it became my illustrator. In fact, it worked in so many industries at the same time, wearing different hats at the same time, and being great at everything. And I think that's the power of ChatGPT. So yeah, that's how I built a brand with AI. It wasn't perfect, like far from it. I had to fight with broken mockups, inconsistent mascots, cooldowns, the bloody cooldowns, and prompts that were confusing and winding. But it all worked, and it made me think. AI is still really far from replacing designers and creatives in general. The truth is, from where I stand, real design is context driven. And right now, AI is mostly focused on content, not context. But what it does really well is give you a hand when your ideas feel stuck. It gives you range. It gives you options. So if you're creative, don't panic yet, but learn how to use the tools, the free ones, the paid ones, whatever you can get your hands on. Become a sharper, more evolved version of yourself. Because AI won't take your job away. A creative who uses AI will. This was fun, it was hard, but it was worth it. And I believe this is just the beginning. I'm Joshua, and this was the BeanBoost case study using ChatGPT. Smell you later. Bye.